For today, we might look at getting this back corner done in the frame, and that'll work better for us time-wise as well. Now this one's rusted away and we will have to make a new piece naturally, and these are an easy piece of metal shaping for a novice. Like, this is where you can really start to have a little play about getting some shape into the metal. So when we look at this one, we've got a little bit of a curve area across here. We've got a little bit of a recess and a step down here, and it curls down on this side, and the whole lot will come into a point somewhere probably 30 mil, inch and a quarter or so from where the rust is. So we'll have to come down to there, and naturally there's going to be lots of ways we can go about it. If this door was in better condition and we just had a few rust pinholes coming through here, we could shape a piece of metal over the original, and that will give us a good enough repair patch that we can perfect that once we've roughed it into shape, and we can put it on there and we could make that into a no-fill repair and it would come up beautifully. And that's the way I really like to do them. In this case, we've got nothing there, so working to your skill level, making it out of two pieces of metal is going to be easier than making it out of one piece of metal, and putting the weld through this area here where it sort of runs in from the high point on the frame here down to that point there. You'd make a piece that'll come in from this side, pick up that edge there and make a little piece in there. But we'll make a one-piece patch for the corner, and we'll talk about that as we go through it. This is the shape we want to achieve. So this is our good door that I'm going to use on the other car, but it's really quite a sharp corner in here. So this actually comes up almost sort of square shape. It's a little bit past 90 degrees, so it's not going to be like that, it's going to be like that. And then we've got this big flat area down the back and a big flat area under there. And this area in here is not all that scary. So what we're going to do is take our piece of metal that we're going to shape our new piece from, and I'll clamp something along the frame of the other door that'll be supported back here on the good part of the frame, and then we can put our piece of metal on and start working from this edge so we know where we're coming back to get it this way right. So once that's done, we can then make the little wrap across there, and we'll make sort of almost like a part of a cone. We'll sort of just curl it a little bit and make a little bit of an arc across there, and then we can shape it in to fit into our door. And we know that roughly 25 mil inch in from the corner of the door, and we've probably got 13/16 up here, so 21 mil up there sort of thing. It sort of runs in there, we can shape that. And this little divot here where the style line is, that doesn't really even matter at this stage. We can make our replacement patch come all the way up here without that in, and then once we're at the stage of fitting it to the panel and getting it to work, we can take our hammer and dolly and we can actually run this line down here and get this little divot in there, and we're ready to put the skin on from there. So we'll get a piece of metal and we'll start working on it. I cut a rough template from the other door, so all I did was laid this on the corner of the door, held it into shape, and that gave me roughly the size piece of metal I'm going to need. So when we lay a piece of, this is, well, a little bit stiffer than normal paper, a little light card across there, it will just quickly conform to the shape we want, and then it'll give us the size piece of material we want to work with. So when we look at a shape like this, we can get all bogged down in trying to work out, well, what do I do first? Where do I start? Well, there's no right spot or wrong spot to start from. We can start by making this little fold along this edge, and we can still turn this into a great panel. We can start by doing this piece along this side. It'll still come into a great panel. Or we can start by making this curved area across here. It doesn't matter. It's a case of when you look at it and what you think is going to be the easiest thing to start with, just pick something and do it. Now, I'm lucky I've got another door that's in great shape and I can reference back to that. If your door's like this, you can look at the one on the other side of the car. If it's a little bit better than the one you're working on, you can use that as a reference. If it's basically still there and got a few holes in it, you can just hammer the high points down, put a bit of filler in there and just roughly sand it to the right shape so you've got a reference point to go on. But in today's technology age, one of the social media groups put the question out there, does anyone have an image of the inside of the door on my whatever car? And there's going to be people out there that are going to happily send you photos back of good originals. So we've always got something that we can work back with, that we know what they looked like originally, and we'll have something to work to. I've just clamped this little piece of square bar along the bottom of the frame because we know the bottom edge of the door is straight. It lines up with the rocker panel. So here's a straight reference point to go on. And I've put a chalk line on it around about where this line comes down here, where the panel starts to flatten off to form this back edge for the piece to crimp onto. So we know just by looking at it quickly what it's going to look like when it's done. So we can start shaping our new piece of metal and we can sit it in there. We can look quickly at the chalk line and say, yeah, it's on the money, we're close enough. So we can work back to that. So that's just a little handy reference point there. So I'm thinking that this template's actually a little bit too big because I've also drawn in about where I want my patch to come to. So that's this line across here. So I might trim a little bit off this, and that'll make it easier to shape, because once we go to our piece of metal, naturally you're going to have this resistance with the strength of the piece of metal across there that's not going to want to bend as you start playing with it. So we know we can pull that back to probably there through to about there. So I'll just mark it with my fingernail on each end and I'll just cut it off with a pair of scissors. So that's something sort of what we're after. So if we cut our new piece of metal to about that size, and we'll work from there. My piece of metal's roughly the right shape now, so I've just got to start bringing some shape into it, and I'm thinking I want to put this curved area into it here. So if I lay it on there, it's got this area here where it rocks and it comes into about this distance in here. We're going to have a situation where, because of the shape of the panel, we're going to put the bit of curve in there and it's going to drop off and come down under here, but then we can work this edge back and fold that up again afterwards. So we'll start by just putting this little bit of a roll in it. So we want to go with just in the middle there. I'm just going to throw a little bit in with my fingers to start with. Now this is the roughing out stage. So that's getting a little bit of curve across the two. Just going to put a rough line down here for reference now that will come through to our chalk line. So we're going to have this area in here is the spot where it starts flattening out, and we're going to have a same thing along this edge in here. So that's got to roll a bit more, and take that off. Now I have no definite thing with these. Every one of these I make is a little bit different, and it's just a matter of sitting there and looking at what you're doing and nutting it out on the go. So if I start putting a little bit of a fold back the other way, it wants to be down around about this area here, and I can either make that by just tapping that over a T-dolly, and it's got a little bit of a radius in here, so we might do it that way. So I'm looking at this one here. It's a piece of 5/16 or 8mm round bar just welded on there, and I made this one for doing a curved edge, so it's got less bent shape in it like that, but it's long enough on the straight enough edge that I can make this little piece in here. So I want to just hammer that back over it, so I'll do that in the vise. Now this is about where my line runs down here, so we know that that's going to wind up being a flat area around that corner. So I'm just going to put my thumb there so I know, or my finger there so I know where it is, and that's the line I want to bend on. So, and that'll also give me a reference to where I want it to be, and that's about there. Right. So that's putting the start of our little fold in there, and we've actually flattened this area out in here a little bit, so we can hammer that back out. Now this is the very basic point. We're only just starting to throw a little bit of shape into this here, so we'll try that on our door and see where we're going. So right away I can see I need to bring this up more because I don't have a big enough bend in there, and then we're going to have to put more curl in this bottom edge in here. So the more curl's easier. We can pretty much do that with our fingers. that area there. That's starting to look better on the panel, and it looks like I've got that on the wrong angle, because what's actually happening now is when we set it on there, instead of dropping away, it's running straight out. So I've got to change this angle in here, and I've got to run this uphill through there. So that'll make that sit down further there. So that's a mistake I've made, but that's why we do these things. It's the roughing out stage. So I'm going to change that little point in the corner there up to about where I'm holding it now. I'll change this line in here. And back to the door. Now that's starting to get roughly the right shape. It still needs a fair bit more work, but we're getting it into the point where this corner's coming along in here, it's running straight across the panel, and now I can start thinking about putting a line down here to get it to curl back the other way. So we're going to tip this edge up here and tuck it in there. This is the point where there's that little reverse curve in it here on the skin. So at this point here, we go from just having a fold that comes down and out to having a fold that bends down and then out. So we've got to be wary of that point there. But at this point in time, with just the roughing out, I'm just going to do it as the one bend, and then I'll come back and creep the other line into it later. Now already we're starting to throw a bit of shape into our panel, even though it's only roughed out at this stage, and we'll probably have to move everything a little bit, but we're starting to get that little bit of a curl in there and then the edge of the frame. I think I've actually stuck this one up. Wasn't all that happy with where that one was going, so I've just flattened it out again, and I'll have another crack at it because it just didn't want to play the game. That happens. So what I'll do, start off exactly where I was before. I'll throw a bit of curl into it, but what I did was I came way too far in from the edges. I should have actually worked on my original template and known that we were coming in about this far and about that far from the edge, and that was the reference points I should have been working with. Should have followed my template instead of sitting there and going, I can make that, and being the big hero. But instead we shall just start with this bend on the bottom, wrap it around, and we'll see if we can get this to play the game. We all make mistakes with these things, so piece of metal, at that point it's easy enough to flatten it out and go again. You could throw it away and grab another piece of metal. Over my lifetime I have thrown sheets and sheets and things of the stuff away, but little things like this normally we'll just want to play the game. And as I say before, if you're having trouble throwing up all this shape in one piece of metal, make it in two pieces, it'll work better. So I'm going to say we're going to put our little fold just in there, and we'll do it the same way we did it before, just roll it on that little piece of round bar and get the radius in the corner, and then we'll start by tipping this other piece around on top of it. Might just pull a little bit of it in on the edge of the vise, and that's going to give us a bit sharper radius. But what I'll do now is just tap it over the round bar to actually get that curved radius where I want it. back to the door. We can sharpen that up a little bit on the corner. Okay, well that must be getting somewhere near where we want it to be. And we'll just try that on the door. Okay, that's starting to fit in the corner there. We still need to fold this edge a little bit more, but we can start looking at where we're going to wind up. So if we get some curl in it, and we've got to remember we've got to come back to this point in the back here. So just have to hammer that bit down. Not what I wanted. Okay. Believe it or not, I've made a lot of these, and as soon as you want to put a camera in there, nothing wants to play the game. So, just got to work it. So what we're doing now is everything we're doing, we're shrinking or stretching part of this panel. So we're going to have a little period of time where we're going to have way too much metal, but as we start working it and hammering it, we're going to stretch the areas that need to be stretched, and we'll shrink the other areas down, and we'll get it to fit the door. So everything I do changes it and gets it closer to the shape. So don't expect to see a result straight away. The first time you hit it with the hammer, suddenly you're going to have a corner there. You're going to have to work it a little bit. So we're coming down there. So the more I'm bringing this area here down, the closer I'm getting this area up here, right? When we look along the bottom of the door, when we hold the bottom line straight, we've got this area flowing back into the corner quite nicely. We're still quite high through here, so that's the area of material we're going to have to shrink down, and we'll do that. I'll just put it back on the edge of the anvil and I'll hammer it a little bit in here, and that'll stretch this edge out here. We can also work this edge against the anvil by just hitting it with the hammer, and that'll stretch that area there out as well. But I'm thinking if we just prop it in the corner and tap it, we'll get a result. It'll start coming into where we want it to be. Now we're starting to show a little bit of this corner in here, and it's starting to look a little bit like a door corner. And we've got this area here, even though it's a bit wavy and all over the place, it's starting to come into the shape where you'll wind up crimping the skin over the edge of it and turning it back into a door. So if we sit it in here, it's beginning to conform. We can see it's out of shape, but it's an important time now to actually just go over to the other door, and we'll reference it to make sure we're on the right track and it's starting to look like what we really want it to look like. When we look at this door here, we've got this little bit of a crease in it here, which is what we've got shaping in here nicely. And that one there is almost the right shape, and it angles back in a little bit. So we might have to play with that a little bit to get where we want it. But I think that'll do it. Once we get this second fold in here, that'll all be working. And this one here's got quite a lift in here and then it flattens out. Well, we've still got to bring ours down a bit on the top. And when we come into this corner in here, we've got a high area in here which we don't have in our new skin. So we've got to lift that up in there. But if we look at GMH, this has got little rimples in it all the way around here. So when we get our patch to come in here, if we wind up with a few little wrinkles and things in the corner with the piece we've made, it doesn't matter because the original panel actually had that in there. So although we don't want tool marks, we don't want vice jaw marks and things like that in there, it doesn't matter if we've actually got a few little wrinkles in it because it'll come back closer to the original. So we'll go back over to the vice and we can increase this little fold in here because although it's got quite a nice radius in the back here, it's coming into quite a tight fold in the corner. So I can actually clamp this in the vice jaws and hammer this corner in here and we'll get that close to looking like the original. I'm just going to use my hammer. It's got quite a good radius on the back of on the cross pane there. That will work. We can use a blunt coal chisel here or something like that, even a piece of wood that's been radiused on the end. Any one of those things will give us this nice little curve in the corner and crisp up this little fold. I'm thinking that I'm getting it, it's almost there. It wants a little bit more down this end, but this end's too tight. So we'll come back to our radius dolly and we'll just re-radius that corner. But I want to crisp this area up in the back here still. Okay, so that's tightened that little radius up in there. So if we just reduce this corner in here, it'll come back closer to our original. If you get a few little bumps and tool marks in them as you're going, you can just tap them out. The various T-dollies will work, or just a handheld dolly. We've got a little bit of a crease in there from my previous attempt at getting it in the right spot, but that's not really going to worry me. That'll work out as we go. And looking at the other door, a few wrinkles that sort of come in from this direction will look closer to the factory as well. So we might even add a couple of those in there deliberately to try and get it to look like an original door. So this side is starting to take shape, so I'm pretty happy with it along this corner here. The fold's still not quite at the right shape. It needs a little bit more of a fold tipping in there so it'll sit down. But what I'm going to do now is, because this is out a step on this edge here and our cardboard template pulled into the right shape, I'm going to put this line in here, back into this top edge here, to actually tuck this corner in a bit. So we can see that that is, I'm thinking 5/16 to about 3/8 there. So if we mark where it fades out, and that's where our little reverse scallop is for our door skin as well. So we want that close to the right spot. So that's going to be sitting in there, and it's going to be about there. So we want to bend that back the other way along that line there. So we'll just do that in the vise, I think. Now we haven't got the right little curve in there, but it's getting in the area of it, but we're starting to get a bit of shape in our panel. We know this one's got to have a little bit of a curve this way. This one's got to have the same up there, but it's not much. So I'm thinking that we'll just tap that around, and we might just do that on the bench a little bit now. Try and pick that up a little bit. That gives me a little bit of curve in there. I've got a big low spot in here that I want to work out. Now I always have a degree of experimentation on the fly, so I've played with this a little bit. I've hammered out a few little spots that I know are definitely wrong, and now we can start fine-tuning it to the door. So we can see here it's flat in the middle there, so we need to kick a lot more curl on this edge. And this is all the just on the fly sort of stuff. And okay, so we've got a crease come into it in here, and it's popped it up in the wrong direction, and we know that's got to actually sit down more in that corner, and I can tell straight away this fold here needs to be increased a bit too. So this is where we're starting to head towards the fitting it to the panel stage, but we're getting there. It's starting to get that bit of a look to it. This area in here still needs more work. It's got to have a bit more of a dip in it that way, and we'll come back and fold this, and we've got a spot here that's going to need a bit of stretching out, so we can work this area as well and start relieving some of this in here. We could at this point put it in the stretcher and just give it a little spread in there, and that'll help work, and that's probably where we'll go actually. If you don't have a stretcher, hammer and an anvil or a hammer and a dolly will work, even an old piece of railway line and a hammer, and you can just work this area. And by hammering that hard, we're actually stretching this edge out. We're making the metal thinner and we're stretching it out, and already that's taking on the shape we want it to be. We don't want a sharp crease in there, we want a curve in there. That's where we just work it on the fly. But anyway, we're starting to get into a door shape. So with working this corner in here, I've straightened out this area in there, so that's going to want a little bit more work to get this bit of a bulge through here working. I'll go back to a T-dolly in the vise, and we'll just get this little area in here to curl a little bit more in that, and we're starting to get him to sit down in that corner quite nicely. You can throw this up too much at this point in time, it won't matter, because you can work it back down into the panel. It's easier to drop it back down than what it is to lift it once we start clamping it to the panel and getting it accurate. Now, this panel rocks, and we can pick our low spot from where the rock is. So that's just through there, it's pivoting on my new panel. So I need to get a bit more of a indentation through here, a crease through here, and once again we can do that by bending it, or we can do it by stretching it. I'm going to go back to the T-dolly and just work this and actually stretch out the little strip in here, and that should hopefully create a couple of little wrinkles like the original panel had, and it'll relieve the spot where it's rocking. Because I'm wanting to deliberately stretch this area out, I'm actually hitting it quite hard. So you can hear when the hammer comes down, it smacks it quite hard. There's a nice big clack, 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 clack with it. And if you feel this piece of metal now, you can actually feel the grooves in it where that T-dolly was sitting underneath it. So they're the areas that we've made skinnier, like squashed it down, but we've also stretched it out a bit. So when we come back to our panel, we've got an area where it's still rocking, but instead of being here, it's out there. So that one I'm just going to bend a little bit with my fingers, but it does feel like it wants a little bit of stretching along that edge as well. And this is where we've got shape in the metal, and that's why I say these are a good spot to start learning a little bit about what sheet metal will do, because at the end of the day, all we need is this piece here accurate. This little bit in here, if it's a little bit low in a few spots or a little bit high, it's not going to affect the operation of the car. And in the majority of cases, it won't be visible because no one's really studies the insides of the doors that much. You can't get a line on them when you look down the side of the car and say, oh, the inside of his door's got that little bit more of a bulge there, or it's a little bit flat. It just doesn't work that way. So if you're using this as like a practice corner before you start moving on to pieces that are on the outside of the car in full view, you can learn a bit about stretching and shrinking, getting a bit of fullness in your piece of metal and things like that on the go. And then when you start looking at making outside panels, you've got a better idea about it. So looking at it now, this area here wants to be lifted. So I think I might just get that on the back on the anvil, and we'll just open that out on this little steel bench, and we're already getting it in the semblance of being a door corner. We've got a low spot just in here, and I'll start working that back on the T-dolly, and that'll spread this a little bit in here. This area down here is starting to look pretty close to the original door, and once we get this to sit down where it's actually rocking in the middle, we'll almost be there. So we've got some little fine wrinkles in there, and they're similar to what Holden's got in there. So if we don't go crazy with the high build primer and we get our weld nice and finished off in there, we should have it looking very close to the original once we get it finished. So that is sitting in there. It's virtually sitting on the panel. It's got to come down now. So this corner, I'm still propping somewhere. So I've got a spot in here where I don't have quite enough bulge in it. So I've got to actually get compound curve into this corner. So it's going to be back to a dolly and work this area up in here to get a little bit more fullness in here. But at this point, we could put this on this door, get it to fit around, get the perimeter in the right spot, and that would work. No one's going to be able to open this door and say, that's a little bit out of line, because we are so close. We just need to pull up a little bit more area in here, and we're right on the money. So that's given us a nice curve down there, a nice curve around there, and it's brought up this whole area in the middle. And that's starting to look quite good in my opinion. Might just give it a few taps through here, get a little bit of a radius in there. Okay, we'll try that on the door and see how we're going. Now we're getting it fairly reasonable. On our HG door, we just want to radius this little area here off. And we'll tidy that up there a little bit. Now at this stage, even right up to putting the skin on, it doesn't matter if this is a little bit too rounded or too proud there, because once we crimp the skin on it and we work it, we will get it to conform to the right shape anyway. The rest of it is pretty good. I'm not quite happy with this fold in here. I've got an area in there that it's just not really where I want it. It's close, but it's not quite really how I'd like to see it. And I've got a high spot just in here that wants tapping out. A lot of this we can fine tune once we've got it attached to the door, and just get these tiny little ripples where we want it, get these little corners to sit down, and we can work them on the fly. But we're getting pretty close to taking our piece of flat metal and turning it into a door corner. Right, that's pretty good. It's a little bit more of a fold in there. I'll grab a couple of pairs of vice grips and I'll get him clamped in place, and we've got it good enough now that I can clamp it down hard against the good parts of the door either side of it, and then we can work the door and the corner to get it all to line up for that last little bit. But we're starting on the fine tuning now. It's well and truly past the rough in stage. We've got a patch that looks relatively Holden shape. Once that goes on there, a little bit of a grind, bit of a trim, grind the weld, and this is going to be very close to the original. I'm expecting a no-fill repair, and I can go straight to paint. I don't want to be sitting here and putting body filler in the corner, because that really sucks, is sitting down there and filing these little corners out on the doors. It takes a long time, and I don't really want it in my car. So we'll grab some clamps, we'll clamp him on and get it finished. Now this is clamped in there really nicely. I've got a little hole just in this back corner here where the bottom corner is just out by a little bit, but I can move this clamp out towards the end of the door a little bit. I can get the hammer in there, and I can get another hammer and I can drive that in there. I can use a blunt chisel to just work that corner into where it should be. This area looks great. It lines up perfectly with the skin. There's no lumps and bumps, there's no holes in there. So we can mark this across there and just cut that and drop that in at that point. We've got this little bit of a curve through here that we should have on this edge, and this little step over here clamps into place, and it all lines up there. So that is our patch pretty much done. We've just knocked it up out of a flat piece of metal in not a lot of time. So from here, it's a case of trim it to suit, and what I'll do is, instead of having triangular ends on them where it runs across the crimp area, I'll just cut them off square, and then it's just a case of marking this with my scriber, trimming it back to that point, and then I know I can actually butt this in there and weld it, and once it's welded on there, I can do any fine tuning after that. Thank you very much guys for watching. We'll catch you next time.